Hey everyone, I'm back. Thanks again for giving a listen and for giving what I have to say some thought. Again, this hardworking mom would greatly appreciate a thumbs up, a like, a share, and a forward, whatever you can, especially if you agree with me and or like my ideas and my viewpoints. Today, I really wanted to address something that really nags at me. It nags at me as a parent, but it would nag at me regardless, just simply being a member of society and watching its steady downward decline and spiral down the proverbial rabbit hole. Today, I'd like to address a headline I stumbled across the other day, which reads, "Mother whose daughter was killed by fentanyl rips Mayorkas on border," noting he gets paid to kill our children. Now, while I can't say that I completely agree with her, I don't completely disagree with her either. It is our politicians' job and duty to protect the people, the very same people who put them in positions of power and prominence, the very same positions of power and prominence that give them the entitlement to do right by us, to ensure our safety, our children's safety. And that is what will garner them future votes and future positions of power, prominence, and of course, wealth. The kind of wealth, by the way, that you and I will never know. But as I've said before, I'm not so certain that it's just the political puppets and their puppeteers that are to blame. I think that the endemic problem has roots that go much deeper than that. And in fact, I'd like to reflect on a quote that says, when you point a finger at someone else, there's three pointing back at you. And in this particular instance, while I still do want to place the preponderance of the blame on those in power, I would like to take some of that blame, the other three fingers pointing back at us, and put it on we, the people. Not only because of who we put in power, but also because we, I firmly believe, have become an inherent part of the problem. Problem that kills our children? Am I insinuating that we, the people, we, the parents, are killing our children? Well, in fact, to a certain extent, yes, I am. That is exactly what I am implying. Now, I cannot speak for everyone or this woman. I don't know everyone's situation. I don't know this woman's situation, and I cannot judge. But I think that we, as communities, as societies, are just as culpable as the politicians who are allowing the distribution of these deadly drugs, and just as culpable as the drug dealers who are infiltrating our neighborhoods and our communities and infesting them with these deadly narcotics. How so? Well, because the people we the people put in power are the very same individuals who turn a blind eye and a deaf ear on those who prey on us like pariahs. Yes, the cartels, the drug dealers, and even in many instances, the people in professions such as pharmacists and doctors. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that every pharmacist or every doctor be painted with the same broad brushstroke. But whether you agree with me or not, we have seen the damage that many vaccines and medications can cause. In fact, many medications on TV come with warnings warnings that seem more dire than the ailment they are attempting to cure. And yet, like bleeding sheep, we follow in obedience. We willfully and willingly drink the Kool-Aid. In addition, we the parents, we the people, have accepted what has now become the new normal, with the legalization of marijuana, and in some cases and in some states, provinces, and nations, harder and more sinister drugs that take down society quicker, faster. But does it really begin with the use of illicit drugs? I would tend to argue no. In fact, it kind of brings me back almost 30 years when Home Alone came out. Never was a big fan. In fact, I don't really think I've ever watched the movie in entirety. But case in point is that the child who was inadvertently left home by accident was up to basically no good, which in the end turned out to be a good thing, but I digress. The kid was up to no good. The kid was essentially being a mischievous kid, or, to paraphrase or rephrase, being a kid. And nowhere in the movie was it insinuated or implicated that the kid in the movie needed to be categorized or classified as having some sort of mental and social deficit. He was not labeled as being disobedient, defiant. He was not labeled as being ADHD or ADD. He was simply seen as a child who was mischievous, which in past generations was the overwhelming expectation of children. And parents approached parenting with that knowledge in mind, which is why, for the most part, many mothers stayed home or had careers that allowed them to be home when their children were home, and why children were under the constant and perpetual purview and supervision of adults, even if it was older children in the family who can keep an eye on those who were not yet mature enough, dare I say, evolved enough to fully think out their behaviors and their actions. Yet, most of us grew up and probably have some interesting stories to tell without ever being labeled or diagnosed. Even the boys we knew, the ones that cause havoc in our schools and in our communities, were just seen as overly adventurous children. And they all grew up and got over it, and most of them are successful, contributing members of society today. Most of us looking back and laughing at our foibles and stupid choices. However, we are failing to give our children, our grandchildren, our children of our friends and family, and the list goes on. We are failing to give the children of today the same courtesy that we got as children. Instead, beginning in childhood, we the people, along with the medical professionals who are paid quite handsomely for their compliance, if you will, to the new agenda, are willing to put our children into boxes, into categories, and to place lifelong labels on them. I don't think that the fentanyl is the root of the problem. I think it is a byproduct of a problem, of a systemic problem that began in childhood, and not a problem that is related to or correlated to dysfunctional families. Although I do strongly believe that a male presence is imperative in a normal household, as do I believe that a maternal presence, a strong maternal presence, is also and equally as imperative in a normal upbringing. But that's an aside. What I am suggesting is that beginning in their most formative years, our children, once they enter a social and scholastic environment, as early on as daycare, they have begun to be placed in categories, if you will. They are categorized by behaviors that adults are no longer willing to accept as normal childhood behaviors, and moreover, not willing to deal with. We do not want, and I may be guilty of it as well, and from time to time, we do not want the responsibility that goes along with caring for and raising or educating children. Children are absent-minded, they are creative, they are fidgety, they are impulsive, and the list goes on. And as adults, especially as we no longer have children for the most part in our late teens and early to mid-20s, as motherhood and fatherhood becomes part of a more mature crowd, like myself, having more mature parents of younger children, it becomes more difficult for us to cope with the shenanigans of little people, because we are that much more disengaged and that much further from our own childhoods, which was not the case necessarily in the past when mothers and fathers were in their late teens to late 20s. So their childhood was not that far removed. And yet everyone from our monetarily backed medical professionals to the subsidized academic professionals, and even to many parents, we are going along with the rhetoric that children who behave as children have something biologically wrong with them, and that they are on some sort of spectrum, if you will. Now, I'm not saying that issues such as autism and ADD and OCD don't exist. In fact, I would probably be classified as ODD because I like everything in my refrigerator lined up in size order with labels facing forward. But that has never prevented me from successfully completing an education, from successfully seeking out gainful employment, from being a wife or mother or daughter or niece or anything. I can function fully and appropriately in society. But then again, I was never put in a box. I was never labeled. I was allowed to be a child and to outgrow my childish behaviors in my time. So yes, I am putting much of the onus of this failing society and this drug deluded society on us, not only for the choices we make in our political leaders who fail us, but because we often fail ourselves. We first and foremost put ourselves at a disadvantage by looking for easy ways out for ourselves. If our life at home is stressful, then we seek medication. If we are faced with anxiety, we seek out medication. If we find ourselves overweight and in need of losing a few pounds, rather than changing our diet or exercise program and regimen, we seek out pills. And we ourselves like to be placed in categories, taking the onus off of us for our social deficiencies, rather than taking our lumps and realizing that we, as adults especially, are in control of ourselves and our emotions and how we handle situations without the aid of alcohol or prescribed pills, which, by the way, have created an overwhelming opioid epidemic. And then we continue to pass on our insecurities and our inabilities to deal with life to our children. We seek out to find out what is causing their behavior. What is causing their behavior is simply the fact that they are children. That is the root cause of their behavior. Childhood is the root cause of their stupidity and their behaviors, even their inappropriate behaviors. Yet we are not comfortable with not being able to take control of our own lives, so we are looking to stigmatize our children as also being incapable of fostering control over their lives. It's not that little Johnny or little Jane don't behave or won't behave or need time to learn how to behave, but instead it has become little Johnny and little Jane simply can't behave because of external factors that do not allow them intrinsically to gain control of their behaviors, even over time. So what does that mean? It means that now our children paint themselves into a corner. They internalize the labels that are placed on them by doctors, therapists, educators, society, and even family and friends and parents alike. And so now our children begin to define themselves, not by what they can be, but what they are currently. And rather than simply see themselves as children currently, they see themselves as damaged goods in need of fixing. And that fixing is not a fixing that is reliant upon time and, again, maturity, but a fixing that requires external intervention. And more often than not, that external intervention suggests therapy because there's something wrong with that child, and or medication to alleviate what the child is demonstrating as not being able to control. So, from a very young age, from daycare and on, our children are learning to identify themselves as damaged goods and to place themselves into boxes and into categories of being substandard, never fully understanding that they are capable, without any assistance and with nurturing and love, rising above. They focus not on what they can succeed in the future, but how their current immaturity, current inabilities because of being children are affecting them. So they only see themselves in a certain light. And so we, the parents, then concede because we don't want to deal with the trouble at school. The schools don't want to deal with the trouble. We don't want to deal with the schools, and so on and so forth. And so we concede to basically zombifying our children and placing them on medications to control behaviors. And what happens as a byproduct of that, and I should know because my dad was a Vietnam vet who suffered from PTSD, and of course he did seek out therapy, but in addition to therapy was put on medication, supposedly temporarily, but what had happened over the course of time is that the medication was an easier fix than the therapy. And so the 2.5 milligrams became 5 milligrams, became 10 milligrams, became 15, became 20, and the trajectory continued. And it did not necessarily fix the problem. It simply masked the problem for a certain amount of time. And that is the kind of trajectory we are putting our children on. We are teaching them from their earliest adolescent experiences that in order to fit in and be accepted, they need to fit nicely and conveniently into a certain pattern, into a certain box. Otherwise, they are deficient in one arena or another, and that there is something broken about them. And the only way to fix what is broken is to medicate. And so now we have a young group of basically children who are becoming addicted to the personality assigned to them and addicted to the medications that are prescribed for them before they reach puberty, before they reach their preteen years. That is harmful on so many levels, but it does create a pattern, a negative pattern, a pattern that as these children mature and face other challenges and struggles, forces them to revert to their comfort zone, a comfort zone that has told them all their lives, from toddlerhood to their teenage years and beyond, that the best way, the quickest way, the easiest way to fix a problem is with medication. And so now we have a group of young people whose early childhood medications continue to increase in dosage as they mature, and who then begin to seek out other forms of self-medicating as they encounter and try to navigate other challenges that are intrinsic to older children and to a more mature understanding of life and the world around them. Thereby, with the legalization of marijuana and in some instances other illicit drugs, which are more harmful, we are seeing more and more youth at earlier and earlier ages seeking out the assistance of these extemporaneous substances to help them cope with friendships, scholastic challenges, tests, teachers, and with life in general. And sadly, and because of our acceptance of early on medication, and because of our own usage of medication to quell our own, I don't even know what to call it, our own issues, and because we have accepted things like marijuana as harmless and are even willing to embrace the legalization of things like magic mushrooms, heroin, etc., giving addicts even safe spaces at work so that they can function effectively under the influence, we are therefore telling the next generation or next generations that all these outside influence and outside ways of coping and dealing are okay. Everyone is doing it. And they're doing it from the time they're in preschool or nursery school or daycare. It's just a different form of substance use and abuse that translates and eventually transpires into literal substance abuse. In fact, there was an article that says a woman gave birth during a party only to toss an infant into the dumpster to continue drinking with friends. This is what we the people, have created by allowing political figureheads take the reins to destroy us, to destroy our families, and to destroy our children. And situations we have created by telling everyone that life is too hard to work 5 days a week, too hard to work 40 hours a week, too hard to be responsible for our own aging and aging well by exercising, eating a healthy diet, etc., but instead fueling up on Botox or taking anti-anxiety medications because we got fired from our jobs, or we had to have a career change due to COVID, or whatever the situation may be. So we have made it easy for our children to follow in our footsteps and follow our example. And this because with every generation, we have become more entitled and more spoiled and less willing to do the hard work that adulthood and life requires. We are looking to pass the buck and pass the blame. And part of passing that blame is professing, even to ourselves, that we no longer have control with who's in the White House, no longer have control with what's going on in society, no longer have control over any life situations, including our own behaviors and the way we respond. And therefore, we need help, and our children need help. And this is what we are teaching, and that is what they are learning. This is a sad testament to the world at large. It is a sad testament to those of prior generations who fought hard and worked hard so that we could have better, so that we could do better. And yet, rather than progressing, we are going backwards. But in order for us to now progress, we do, I think, need to go backwards. We need to go back in time to where certain ideologies, if you will, certain behaviors were taboo. Doing drugs was once seen as taboo, not something you posted on your social media page. Divorcing 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times was taboo. Having children on a multitude of medications was to some degree taboo. And I think we need to take 1,000,000 steps back if we are going to move forward. Yes, I said it. We need to go backwards in order to better our future. Back to a time when we were expected to dress a certain way, to behave a certain way, where women were expected. Yes, I said expected. I'm sorry if I've offended you, but if the shoe fits, let's all stick our fat feet in it. Where women were expected to care for themselves, for their homes, for their children, and who had to suck it up, buttercup. And where men were equally responsible for taking care of the home and providing for the family. And the time when we were expected to be the adult in the room, not the medicated adult in the room, not the zombie in the room, but the adult in the room, the adult who set the stage for the children and the grandchildren. And I think that this disgraceful, debilitating situation we have found ourselves in has become our problem. It is our fault. Again, not only for the people we have put in power, wittingly or unwittingly, but because we ourselves have looked to excuse ourselves from taking responsibility for ourselves and, in essence, for our children. Our children do not need Ritalin. Our children do not need to be medicated, because that medication, from Ritalin to fentanyl, may seem like a long road, but in reality is a very short road, and it is a straight line to continued devastation and destruction. So I implore everyone, and everyone's situation is different, but I implore everyone to stop and examine not only themselves, but the situation at large, and begin with every household. First, you fix yourself, and then you fix your children. And that also begins with putting the proper people in place and in power to ensure that we all don't conveniently fall into some kind of box that conveniently takes the pressure off of us and puts it on others. So again, my heart goes out to every parent who has ever struggled with a child with issues, and every parent who has lost a child. But we are creating our own monsters.